Hello, everyone. Good morning and welcome to Vishwa Talks. My name is Mani. Thank you all for attending today's event. For those of you who've been on a Vishwa Talk before, a warm welcome back. And for those of you who are joining us for the first time, here's a little bit about us. Vishwa Talks is an initiative by Vishwa.org. Vishwa.org is an online platform for everyday change makers and social champions. It's a crowdfunding and crowdsourcing platform that is aimed at helping anyone find the support they need in their efforts and endeavors to solve problems for themselves and for others, and in the process, make the world a better place. Vishwa Talks are a series of weekly webinars hosted every Saturday that are focused on gaining in-depth knowledge from the experts on a wide range of topics that are pertinent to the current context.
Welcome everybody to this talk for today. So let me start off, let me just get right into the topic that I've chosen for today, the Bhakti poets or the poetry of the Bhakti era. And I call them God intoxicated. And you will very soon know why I call them God intoxicated. But before we actually get into the poetry of the period, let's take a quick overview of the political conditions at that point of time when the Bhakti movement actually started. A very brief historical context. The political conditions appeared to be declining between the 7th and the 6th and the 7th centuries AD, even though the Mauryan and the Gupta empires had been largely successful, but they couldn't continue to provide a permanent regime. In the south, a conflict between warring states persisted for several centuries. The Pallavas succumbed to a combined attack from their neighbors, the Pandyas, and their feudatories, the Cholas, who finally came to be the major power in the south around that time. Now, by the third quarter of the 12th century, Chola ascendancy was also waning, and Chalukya feudatories set up their own kingdoms. The dynasties of the Yadavas, the Hoysalas, and the Kakatiyas came into prominence at that time. In the north as well, there was the beginning of the formation of regional states sometime between 700 and 1200 AD, and kingdoms rising in the western and northern Deccan were bridge kingdoms between the north and the south, which was in a way a handicap for them because it involved them in the politics of both regions. Small kingdoms like Kamarupa, which is present-day Assam, Utkal, Orissa, and the kingdoms of the eastern Chalukyas, the Angas, the Solankis of Gujarat emerged. Kashmir came into prominence between the 7th and the 12th century as a seat of knowledge. Now, it was during this period that the reign of the powerful Rajputs commenced, with the Guhilas of Mewar, the Chandelas of Bundelkhand, and the Chauhans, the Tomars, and several other dynasties. Now, for some time, northern India had a respite from foreign aggression until, from the northwest of the subcontinent, began the raids of Mahmud of Ghazni. And then by the 11th, 12th centuries, repeated raids by Muhammad Ghori. The turf was ripe, beginning to be ripe for a pushback. After a couple of centuries, the Vijayanagara Empire became a major unifying force in the south, bringing several chunks of modern-day Andhra, Tamil Nadu, Orissa, and Karnataka under a common rule. But their ascendancy was also broken by the Bahmani kingdoms, the 5 Bahmani kingdoms which came up: Ahmednagar, Bijapur, Bidar, Berar, and Golconda. And the whole focus, especially the cultural apex or the cultural focus, shifted to Tanjore, where the Nayaka kings and then the Bhosle dynasties came up. Now, the background for the arrival of the Bhakti poets, a little before that, it is an observation that the thoughts and teachings of a civilization are primarily propagated through 2 different mediums: the spoken word and the written text, and the visionaries who spoke and wrote. Now, in the ancient times, this was represented by the Vedas and the Rishis. Later, by the Acharyas, and After the age of the Acharyas, in the post-classical period, when the Sanskrits and Prakrits were slowly giving way to the local languages and dialects, men and women rose in the country, men and women of great strength and great realization, who acted as mediators between the ancient heritage, the dense heritage of the past, and the present and the future generations, who interpreted these hidden and secret knowledge systems and disseminated them to all sections of society. These saint singers in the Indian languages had to appear to revitalize many aspects of heritage, and in the process add fresh dimensions and widening participation also. That is why one of the most admired scholars and cultural historians of our country, Dr. V. Raghavan, doesn't call them saint poets. He calls them saint integrators of India. Now, in the South, the Bhakti movement started with the Pallava times. Large parts of both northern and southern India were strongly on the path of Buddhism and Jainism already. Added to that were the periodic Islamic invasions at different intervals. The movement was an effort to reclaim the older faith, albeit with renewed interpretations and several inclusive ideologies. This movement, which can trace its origins, or at least the origins of the concepts, to the Shaiva and the Vaishnava saints of the Tamil land, the Alvars and the Nayanmars, gained a huge momentum with the arrival of the three Acharyas, Shankaracharya, Ramanujacharya, and Madhvacharya, who formulated and propounded the three philosophies of Advaita, Vishishtadvaita, and Dvaita respectively. The early Shaivite movements were largely influenced by Shankara's Advaita. And the Shaiva saint Manikya Vachakar referred to Advaita as raging in the country like a tempest. Most poets and philosophers of that period were followers of Advaitic principles. Post 13th century, with the coming of the 5 major schools of Bhakti Vedanta, propounded by 5 visionaries who rejected Shankara's impersonal God or Nirguna Parabrahma, and they started propounding the idea of the Saguna Parabrahma, or the God with all great attributes, the auspicious God, the God of beauty, the God of form. After this, the Bhakti movement largely veered towards Vaishnava theologies, and intense, prolific verses swept the country, extolling Lord Vishnu in all his various manifestations as Purnavataras, Rama, Krishna, the icon-based avatars or the Archa avatars like Jagannatha, Venkateshwara, Ranganatha, Padmanabha, Panduranga Vittala, and all the icon representations. Before we actually start looking at the literature, let's take a quick look at the basic principles which characterize the Bhakti poets and their poetry. The first one, establishment of an Ishtadaiva, or a beloved deity who was an epitome of good and benevolent qualities and attributes, and singing the Nama, or the name of this beloved God. The second was the uniform emphasis on the Guru as somebody who imparts knowledge to you in person, adding his grace and his vision to the knowledge. There are umpteen songs that reflect the idea of the Guru. Vastu Amaulik Dimere Satguru, Meera says. And you have Itade Muktidova, Itade Ma Acharyudu, the sons of Annamacharya. And there are so many, Guru bin Gyan, Kahan se paun. So there are a number of songs which extol the Guru. The third is Bhakti as an all-inclusive doctrine which consolidates all people without distinction of caste, community, or sect. Repeated clarification of the true form of the Lord and true form of devotion and worship. Kind of a reformist zeal. I don't really like the word reformist, but which eschewed all sham and formalism, which is devoid of pure devotion. the intimate and human nature of the relationship with your deity as the mother, as the friend, as the companion, as the servant, as your lover, which took liberties to tease, to mock, to scold, to chastise, or even question the Godhead when necessary. There was an attempt to harmonize the concepts of jnana, yoga, and bhakti, but laying utmost stress on devotion as the most befitting of all the paths to salvation. Now let's look at the varied ways in which these poets extolled and interacted with their Ishtadaivas. Songs and verses which are actually etched into the cultural memory of this land. The cult of intense emotion and love, both erotic and esoteric, at the same time, had come into its own, as exemplified by the poetry of the forerunners of this thought, the Nayanmars and the Alvars. The greatest among the Shaiva Siddhas of Tamil Nadu was Tirumular. His central message was of synonymity of love and God and the omnipresence of Shiva in everything. He sang, Yengum Tirumeni, Yengum Sivasakti, Yengum Chidambaram, Yengum Tirunattam, Yengum Sivamai, Irattalal Yengengum, Tangum Sivan Arul Tan Velayattade. Everywhere there is sacred body. Everywhere there is the power of Shiva. Everywhere there is Chidambaram. Everywhere there is a sacred dance. Since everywhere there is the sacred dance, everywhere the sacred game sustains. Talking about the importance and innocence of true seeking, he said, the child played ecstatic with his elephant, proud. He cared not that it was made of wood. Unplayful man beheld but a lump of wood. He missed, alas, the elephant's form. Scores of Shaiva saints like Appar, Sundarar, Arunagirinathar, Tirujnana Sambandar laid strong foundations for a wave that had begun its rapid flow. The word Alvar literally translates to God intoxicated, which is why I chose to call this talk that. The specific contribution of the Alvars was to substitute experience for speculation. This experience was bhakti, or the love of God, through prapatti or sharanagati, surrender. The human interactions and humaneness that they infused the Godhead with made him appear to them in all stages. And Nammalvar looked at Krishna as a child and as a lover. Kulashekara Alvar identified himself with Devaki, the mother of Krishna. Periyalvar, speaking as Hanuman, projected the Dasya Bhava, or the attitude of a servant. The male poets seamlessly took up the role of the God's lover. As Nammalvar says in a verse, the village is asleep, and all time has gathered into midnight. If he does not come, who can save me? O foolish heart, why did you love him so? Will the red sun never come out riding in the chariot of the east? Will this night never die, but go on dying little by little, like me? The world is asleep, indifferent, but I am awake, waiting. So this was the tone of the Alvars, and Andal, the earliest of the female mystics and the only woman in the pantheon of the 12 Alvar saints, cried out her pain of separation from her beloved Lord, in several hundreds of verses. In one verse from the Nachiyar Tirumori, she says, Enba urihi inavel nedankangal imai porunda palanadum tunbak kadal Pukka Vaikundam என்பது ஓர் தோணி பெறாது உரல் ஹின்றேன் உண்ப உடையாரை பிரிவ உர நோய்து நீயும் அரிதி குயிலே பொன் புரை மேனி கருளக்கொடி உடைய உன்னியனை வரக்கூவாய். Translated, the verse says, my body has melted to the very bones. My eyes have not closed for many a day. cast into the ocean of misery, I am drifting without a lifeboat. O quill or koel or the cuckoo, who knows what it is to be separated from a beloved, go and call the blessed Lord of the golden hue, he who bears a Garuda banner. Now, this is how cleverly they played with words. She's appealing to a bird to go. So she's telling the bird, he's a Lord who has a bird on his flag itself. The Divya Prabandham, which is the compilation of the work of the Alvars, became an integral part of ritual worship in most temples of southern India following the Pancharatra Agama. We all would have heard the peals of Palland, Palland, Pallai Rattand during the early morning sevas or the Balabhogam, the breakfast repast of the god, if you happen to go to, a Ranganatha Swami temple or something in the early morning. Now in Kerala, Jnanappana, the 16th century devotional poem written by Poontan, was a fervent prayer to Guruvayurappan. Now it became very popular among the people of Kerala. Eruttachan, Cherusuri Nambudri, Kunchan Nambiyar, Melapattur Narayana Bhattadripad. These are some of the important bhakti poets who enriched the traditions of Kerala. Unfortunately, not many translations of their works are available. And I also, unfortunately, I can't read all the languages of the country. So almost immediately after the arrival of Ramanujacharya and the development of the Vishishtadvaita philosophy, there rose a luminous icon in the east, in a small village called Kendubilva in Orissa. He paved the path for the Krishna cult of mad ecstasy, which would sweep over the eastern and northern India in the coming centuries, leaving great impact on the Sankirtana composers of South as well. This poet, this thinker, this visionary immortalized Radha Krishna as the primary deities of worship and unabashedly adopted the cult of the erotic to express intense devotion to Krishna through the voices of Krishna, Radha and her Sakhi, Jayadeva Kavi. He said, Yadi Haris Smarane Sarasam Mano, Yadi Vilasa Kalasu Kutuhalam. If you want to hold Hari in your heart, if you love the idea of love, Madhura Komala Kanta Padavalim, Shrunu Tada Jayadeva Saraswati. Listen to this wonderful, beautiful song, sweet, then tender song of Jayadeva on Kanta. Kanta here being a double-edged sword, it could mean Krishna, it could mean Radha. In an exquisite work spanning 12 chapters, 24 songs and 72 shlokas, he explored every possible nuance of the love of Radha and Krishna, making the reader, the listener, the viewer, the witness or the sakshi, one who will be forever blessed with auspiciousness upon experiencing these divine visions. The Gita Govindam as temple ritual, of course, went on for several centuries in Puri Jagannath temple. But what is amazing is it traveled all the way to South India and even became a temple ritual in the Tamil land as well as in Kerala. To this day, a spate of Krishna Bhakti poetry overflowed after this period, right down to the late 17th century when Yati Narayana Tirtha composed his magnum opus in Sanskrit, the Sri Krishna Leela Tarangini. Following in the footsteps of Jayadeva was the Bengali poet Chandidas. He spun deeply erotic lyrics on Radha and Krishna and is also considered along with Jayadeva as the Adi Guru of the Tantra-based Vaishnavism called Sahajiya Vaishnava Tantra. His lyrics cried out the pain of separation in verses such as Bodhu Kiar Bolibo Ami, Morone Jibone Jonome Jonome Prano Na Thoyo Tumi, Tomar Chorone Amar Porane, Bandhibo Premer Phashi. The one and only Aurobindo translates this verse as, O love, what more shall Radha speak? Since mortal words are weak, in life and in death, in being and in breath. No other Lord but you can Radha seek. Around your feet, the mighty net is wound. Now, while Chandidas spearheaded several mystic movements, another poet, Vidyapati, wrote on Radha Krishna and the Shakti aspect in the Maithili dialect. He describes Radha's separation and says, Bhara Badar Maha Gagar Shunya Mandir Mo. He says, the clouds are filled with water. My pot is filled with water. It is only my mandir that is empty. Now here, mandir could mean, will have multiple connotations. The house, the heart, everything. Now, in ardent songs of devotion to Shakti, he even sang in Sanskrit. And the Shakti worship of Vidyapati was very popular in those regions at that time. Through songs like Kanaka Bhudhara Shikharavasini Chandrika Chayacharu Hasini Dashana Koti Vikasa Banki Matulita Chandra Kale. So with a very powerful chand, he sang songs even in Sanskrit. While the other softer Ashtakam on Krishna, started becoming a household chant around the same time. Vallabhacharya's Madhurashtakam. Where he says, Adharam Madhuram, Vadanam Madhuram, Nayanam Madhuram, Hrudayam Madhuram, Hasitam Madhuram, Hrudayam Madhuram, Gamanam Madhuram, Madhuradhipater Akilam Madhuram. Everything about him is Madhura. This frenzied Krishna Bhakti wave spread like wildfire across the whole of northern and western India, giving rise to exemplary verses of great merit. The blind bard of Mathura, intoxicated with the Pushti Marga, which held Bala Gopal as the primary deity, explored Krishna's Leelas from his childhood pranks right up to the Rasa Leela pastimes of the gopis in numerous verses. Surdas, he immortalized the Vatsalya Bhava, and his Vatsalya Bhava has been compared with the Vatsalya of several other poets in many research works. Now here, speaking on Vatsalya, there are many famous verses of Surdas, like the Kathak dancers, some of you will know. Maya mori main nahi makhan khayo. Maya mori dau bahut khijayo. My brother is, he's teasing me a lot. And he says, Jasumati man abhilash kare. Yashoda's heart is desirous of what? Kab mero lal ghutarvani renge. When will my son start crawling on his knees? Kab dharani pag dvaik dhare. When will he plant both his legs firmly on the ground and walk? So at every stage, she wishes to see him progress. Now, at the same time, his verses to Radha were equally exquisite. In a certain verse where the Sakhis are describing Radha to Krishna, he says, Barunam Shri Vrishbhan Kumari. How can we ever describe this beautiful daughter of Vrishbhan to you? Chapal nain nasa bich shobha, adhar surang sudhari, mano madhya khanjan shuk baithyo, lubdhyo bimba vichari. What does that mean? Chapal nain, her eyes are as restless as wagtails. In between those two wagtails is seated a parrot, which is the nose. This parrot is contemplating upon the fruit which is lying below. So this is a description of Radha's lips. This is the dexterity which Surdas, went on to describe all the aspects of Krishna. Now, known for his grandeur of words, Raskhan, the Muslim saint, learned the Bhakti Marga from Goswami Vitthal Das, and he lived and died in Vraja. In a beautiful verse, he describes Krishna being the Lord of the universe, the unfathomable Lord of the universe, and he says, this Lord, just for a glass of buttermilk, these cowherd girls are making him dance. He says, Sesh, Ganesh, Mahesh, Dinesh, Suresh, Hujahi Nirantar Gave. Who are all these? The Sesha Sai, the Seshnag, Ganesh, Lord Shiva, the Surya, Indra, all of them are constantly singing the praises of this Lord. Jahi, Anadi, Anant, Akhand, Ached, Abhed, Suved, Batave. The Vedas say that this Lord is Anadi and Anant. He doesn't have a beginning, he doesn't have an end. He is indestructible, he is impenetrable, he is unfathomable. Say the Vedas. Narad se Shuk Vyas Rahe Pachihari. Tau Puni Par na Pave. The greatest of the rishis like Narad, Vyas and Shuka also could not, they were disheartened because they could not understand or fathom his form completely. Tahi, him, ahir ki choriyan, chachiyan bhari chaach pe naach nachave. So he says, the word chokariyan would have come from there. He says, chohariyan, these young girls, chachiyan bhari chaach pe, for a small glass of buttermilk, naach nachave. They are making him dance. This is a set of several verses. And if Raskhan's, a grandeur of words was all about the alaukika aspect of Krishna, the poet Bihari of the 17th century was known for his outstanding poems of love. Now, Bihari Satsai, he has 700 verses to his credit, and in a brilliant verse, he says, Kahat sabay kavi kamal se, so mati nain pashanu, atarak in biya lagat kat, upajat virah krishanu. What does it mean? All poets say, he says, he refers to other poets and says, all poets say that eyes are like lotuses, but I say they are like stones. If not, why is it that when they meet, the fire of longing is sparked? This Bihari is known for these outstanding verses of love. And now around the same time, I won't say around the same time, give or take 2 centuries, in 3 different parts of the country, with different deities, different philosophies, rose 3 women mystics, drowning in unceasing love for their beloved deities. Mirabai in the 15th century, singing in Rajasthani, Marwadi, Gujarati, and in Brajboli. Akka Mahadevi of Karnataka, who was striding both the Bhakti Marga and the highly metaphysical path of the Sharanas and the Sharadis, who were the Shaiva mystic saints of Karnataka. And preceding both was Lalleshwari, or commonly known as Lal Ded of Kashmir, the 14th century mystic who propagated Shaiva thought along with the principles of Advaita and yoga. While Meera's crazy love for Krishna veered between that of being the lover or being the servant. So she just kept going back and forth, and she said, Daras bin dukhan lage nain. My eyes hurt just to catch a glimpse of you. Abke tum bichure Prabhuji kabahu na pao chain. Now, if you are separated from me, I will never be peaceful ever again. On one side, she says this, and on the other side, she says, Mohe chakar rakho ji. She says, please employ me as your servant. She says, The tho palak udhado dinanath, main hajir najir kabki khadi. Says, just lift your eyes once and look at me. And I am standing here right ready and waiting for your command. Akka Mahadevi was not docile at all in this context. She fiercely challenges her deity Chennamallikarjuna of Srisailam. And she says, Ayya, ni kelidare kelu, keladiddode manu. You don't want to listen, don't listen. Na ninna haadidelade sairi salare nayya, she says. So she says, Ayya, if you want to listen to me, listen to me. If you don't want to listen to me, suit yourself. But I will not stop singing praises of you. Akka Mahadevi expressed aggressive intimacy in her vachanas. And she said the arrow that is shot should penetrate so deeply that even the feathers do not show. Hug the body of the Lord so tightly that the bones are crushed to dust. Weld to the divine until the very welding disappears. In contrast, Lal Red couches her teachings or her vaks in very dense and subtle metaphors, conveying the metaphysics of yogic realization in verses like, she says, you have to listen to this very carefully. I closed the doors and windows of my body's mansion and caught my breath as a thief within. I bound him fast in the prison of my heart, and with the stinging whip of Om, I flayed him there. Mastering my vital airs, I cast my way through forests 6. When the mystic moon awoke for me and the world of Prakriti dried up, that is when I found my Lord. Imbued with deep devotion and great social awareness, Karnataka and Maharashtra produced a galaxy of saint poets. Subscribing to the schools of Advaita and Dvaita, producing prolific songs in their respective philosophies, the Dasa traditions and the Varkari traditions, both having the common deity Vitthala, Purandara Vitthala and Panduranga Vitthala here. Now, the group of 4 major saints, popularly known as the Marathi Quartet, Sant Gyaneshwar, Eknath, Namdev, and Tukaram, they changed the very method of worship and inquiry through their immortal abhangs. And they started the Ekadashi Jatras to Pandharipur, to which even thousands and millions of people throng even today. While Sant Gyaneshwar was of the Advaitic predisposition, he asked, who resides in my house? Who resides in my body? Is it the Atmaram? Is it the absolute truth? Konache he ghar ha deha konacha. Atmaram tyacha tochi jani. Is it the Atmaram who stays here? While he asked that question, Tukaram found likeness in everything. And he says, Taruvar bija poti, bij taruvara shevti, taise tat samha amha jale, eki ek samavale, udaka varil tarang, tarang udaka se ang, tuka mhane bimba chaya, thai pavali vilaya. The tree is in the womb of the seed. The seed remains after the tree is no more. So it has happened to you and to me that one contains the other. The ripple is on the water is the body of the ripple. Tuka says the shadow of reflections vanish right where they began. The devotional fervor of the Abhang is reflected in compositions like Tirtha Vitthala, Kshetra Vitthala, Deva Vitthala, Deva Puja Vitthala, Mata Vitthala, Pita Vitthala, Bandhu Vitthala, Gotra Vitthala, Guru Vitthala, Guru Devata Vitthala, Nidhana Vitthala, Nirantara Vitthala. So in such compositions, you could see the fervor of the Abhang reflected, and you can understand why it reached millions of hearts. Now, in contrast, the very subtle and evocative poetry of the Kannada Dasakutam are unrivaled in sheer range and artistry. Starting with the line of Narahari Tirtha and Vyasaraya, the Dasa tradition continued uninterrupted for over 4 centuries, the jewel crest being Purandara Dasa. Purandara strikes the keynote of the Haridasa rule of life, where there is admission of human weaknesses and surrender and servitude to God, who is the only master. I shall not let go of your feet, he says. Whatever you do, I shall cling to you, for yours is the task of taking me across. They propounded that knowledge is only a load of information if it does not improve life. They said birth as a human being is a great opportunity. Do not misuse it. In a song where he talks about the soul and its relationship to the para or the transcendental, he says, Giliyu Panjara Dolilla. The material body is referred to as a cage here, and the soul as the parrot, which wants to break free and fly off into infinity. So he composed this song when he lost his wife, and he said the parrot has left the cage and gone. Now, in the same idea is found echoed in a very similar song of Annamacharya, the grand old man, the Pitamaha of the song format in Telugu, who precedes Purandaradasa. Annamacharya says, Jiva tumai undu chiluka, ni vavaliki paramatmudai undu chiluka. He says, oh parrot, be the Jivatma, be the human soul which seeks. On the other side, go and meet your Paramatma and then become him. Now, in a mind-boggling range of songs dedicated to Lord Venkateshwara and Alamelu Manga, Annamacharya explores every possible facet of human emotion and spiritual truth in thousands of compositions. It is he who started the rituals of the Nitya Kalyanotsavams and the Brahmotsavams of the Tirumala Tirupati Devasthanams, to which we see thousands of people going every single year. His famous compositions became literally chants on the name of everybody in the Telugu land. Songs like Sriman Narayana, also popularized by M.S. Subbalakshmi. Brahmam Okkate, Parabrahmam Okkate. Muddugare Yashoda Mungita Mutyamu Vidu, in praise of Krishna. Shirabdi Kanyakaku Sri Mahalakshmi Kini. Nirajalayanuki Nirajanam. Bhavayami Gopala Balam on Krishna, and Adivo Alladivo Sri Harivasamu, describing the hills of Tirumala. Now, while ecstatic Krishna Bhakti was taking over everything in its wake, an orphan who grew up in Kashi on the banks of Ganga would go on to become Tulsidas, the composer of the famed Hanuman Chalisa that we all know. He extolled Rama with grand verbosity in the dialect of Awadhi. Soft and dramatic at the same time, Tulsidas' Ramcharit Manas and his chant of Ram Lalla became a universal chant in northern India, with numerous compositions to his credit like Sri Ramachandra Krupalu Bhajaman Harana Bhava Bhaya Darunam, Thumak Chalat Ramachandra, Jagiye Raghunath Kumar, Gumada Gumadan Ghana Garjat Ghora. Tulsidas was very famous for his dramatic images, which were most appealing. Like we can find in a description he gives of Lord Rama breaking the bow of Lord Shiva. He says in such simple words, he says, Let chadhavat khenchat gaadhe, kaun lakha dekh samathade. He says he took it, lifted it, strung it, and that's it. Everybody couldn't even blink. It happened so fast. And then he said, Ehi chan Ram madhya dhanu tora, bhare bhuvan dhuni ghor kathora. At this point, Rama broke the bow in the middle, and the entire palace was filled with the sound of thunder and lightning. Now, as the deeds of Rama ricocheted through the songs of Tulsidas in the north, there was a fierce devotee of Rama, Bhakta Ramadas of Bhadrachalam. Now, he reprimanded Lord Rama, saying, Are your words precious like gold now? You don't want to waste them on me? Paluke Bangaramayana, Kodandapani. You don't want to talk to me? Paluke Bangaramaye, Pilichina Palakadaye. What is this? I'm calling you, you are not talking to me. In the true spirit of Sri Vaishnavism, where Sri has to be appealed before Vishnu, he goes to Sita and he says, Nanu Brovamani Cheppave, Sitamma Talli. Ask him to rescue me. Nanu Brobamani Cheppu Nari Shiromani. Says, you are the crest jewel of all women. You know, he can never say no to you. Janakuni Kutura. You're the daughter of the noble Janaka. Talli, Amma, Janakamma. So he calls her his mother. Bhadrachalam, where Ramadas installed the idols of Rama, Sita and Lakshmana, till today is one of the most popular Rama temples in the Telugu land. Now, a mystic who was part of the Bhakti movement, but whose verses are also found in the Guru Granth Sahib, was Kabir. He was of the 15th century, born in Varanasi and highly influenced by his Guru Ramananda. He discussed the most profound truths in very simple couplets, and being again of the Advaitic predisposition, he spoke of God as being within in verses like Kasturi Kundal Base, Murgu Dhunde Vanmahi. The Kasturi lies inside the musk deer, but because of the fragrance, the deer is searching everywhere for it. Aisi ghati ghati Ram hai, dunya dekhe nahi. The world is unable to see this Ram who exists everywhere. Following in his footsteps, of course, you had several other poets like Rahim and so, but again, the emphasis on love and mad devotion, which you found in Radha Krishna Bhakti, is also reflected in the Punjabi poet Bulle Shah. Now, Bulle Shah became very popular because of, anything taken up by the film industry becomes very popular. So because of some of his songs picked up by them, he suddenly became a very popular poet. And we don't even know that the songs are of Bulle Shah, but especially the famous song, Raja Raja Kardini Main Aape Ranjha Hoye. So he says, saying Raja Raja, I have become Ranjha. Ranjha main which, main Rajhe which. Hor khyal na koi. He says, no other thought. This is exactly like the Radha Krishna idea, which he's, echoing, and he says, Nime Kamali. Kamali is another word for God intoxicated. And then he says, Bulla ki jana main kaun. Who knows who I am? Avval aakhar aapu na jana. Nothing, we don't know beginning, we don't know end. Na koi duja hor pachana. Nothing we know, we don't know anything. We don't know who we are, what is the beginning, what is the end. And it is this that we seek all the time. Now, this wave continued to impact many other later works across the country, like the Sri Krishna Leela Tarangini of Yati Narayana Tirtha, the Krishna Karnamrutam of Bilva Mangala or Leela Shuka, right down to the 18th century, where the trinity of Carnatic music emerged, Tyagaraja, Muthuswami Dikshitar, Shyama Shastri. The Bhakti wave continued to impact right till there. In fact, I'd say right till Rabindranath Tagore, because his first work, Bhanu Shringer Padaboli, was written in the Maithili dialect, and it is a story of Radha Krishna, very identical to the Gita Govindam, in which he says something very similar to what Chandidas said there, that the net is wound around your feet. He says, Maranare tuhu mama sham saman. So, Radha says, death, you are akin to Krishna to me. So this wave continued, and I think it still continues to impact all of us. Before I end and hand it over to Mr. Mani, I would like to sum up this whole, of course, disclaimer, there are hundreds of other poets, hundreds, and the list is endless, and I couldn't have covered them in the given time, but I want to sum up this whole thing through verse. Since we're talking about poetry, I also want to sum it up through verse. And I say, these wandering bards traverse different paths, but the goal one. They sang profound songs in a language common. They built a deep bond with their own personal deity. And through him, they sang songs of wisdom and piety. These deep philosophies, though couched in simple lore, were difficult to grasp and needed some more explanation. And therefore, our poets, my friend, used symbols, similes, metaphors to make us comprehend. What are these symbols and similes and metaphors that they used? The pot and the ocean, the lotus and the bee, the boatsman who takes you across the existential sea, the seed and the tree, the spider and the web, the thread hidden in the pearl, the rise of the tide and its ebb, the puppet, the puppeteer, the stage and the player, the leela or the sport, the lion and the goat, the dream and the dance, the charioteer and his chariot, the body as the cage and the soul as the parrot. So many of them said the same thing. Be he a mendicant or a lofty king, they embarked unhesitating on the path of devotion, and only surrender, they said, was true salvation. This is the Bhakti poets in a very small capsule. But before I hand over the stage to, or the session or whatever we call this, to Mr. Mani, there are a few people I must definitely thank who have helped me in the process of this, for even the pronunciations. My very dear friends, dancer scholar Jayachandran Surendran and Sri Priya Ramesh for the Tamil verses, Saurav Das, the very young and brilliant designer, and the well-known Kathak exponent Sanjay Kumar Joshi, again a dear friend. They have all helped me immensely, to prepare for this presentation, and I thank all of them. I also thank Vishwa Talks Parampara Gudi Sambaralu for asking me to do this, asking me to talk about something which is my absolute, something that I love the most, I think, in the world, that is poetry and literature. So
I have one question. I have one query. Yes. Namaste, Mohana.
Yes, Mohana. Yes.
But Kabir Das has said, na, Guru Gobind dono khare, Guru and Gobind are standing. I will pray, bow first down to Guru, because he was the one who taught about Govinda, right?
Right. Absolutely.
Right. I'm thinking, can I ask a question, please?
Please go ahead.
So in modern times, nowadays, who are the poets who, speak a lot about bhakti? Because I think society has changed everything, but of course, bhakti is still there. So present day poets, who are those?
Well, your guess is as good as mine here, because there are, post the 80s, 70s, at least in the Chayavadi, poets of Hindi or that era, at least there was some references still made to these concepts. But post the 80s or 70s, I really don't know, So I don't see much work except for individuals who are on the path of bhakti, on the path of sadhana. Individuals like this have contributed immensely. There are works by, I will not say a particular tradition, they don't belong to a certain tradition, I won't say. Or I will not say, they're like Surdas or Tulsidas or Mirabai, but in their own personal sadhanas have given birth to their, to poetry, to verse, to prose. So such people are there today. We find them.
We have no access to their works like that.
So that is the whole problem, because these are, you get to know people. We have one sitting right here, Mr. Ramachandra Rodham is here. He is a great sadhaka. So he has written a book on which is all filled with poetic verses on Devi. So it is a question of us maybe looking for people like that who, have translated their own personal areas, their own sadhanas, their own ideas into works, so that people can access them, people can read them. And I think more people like that should publish, so that it's easily available to people who want to see who are the bhakti poets of the modern times. So I think that's very important. So we have several like that, people like that, who are on their own personal journeys of devotion and practice.
So relating to this question specifically, because Hindi poetry, I don't understand the South Indian languages or Marathi or anything. Right. But for one, are there translations available, which are never as good as the original? I do understand.
No, the original, the translation is always like that horse, the picture of that horse, which circulates on social media, the well-etched horse in the first part and the very wiry kind of a horse on the later half. That is how translations are. Translations can never catch the essence of the original, but there are translations of almost all the bhakti literature of North. You have more than 8 volumes or 9 volumes of Sur Sagar. You have translations of Ramcharitramanas.
So in Hindi and Sanskrit, it's okay, but there are so
English. In English, you have them in English. You have them in English.
Those who know Hindi, you wouldn't want to read it in English, because Hindi is such a rich language.
Absolutely. So you have the options of buying volumes which have the Devanagari, the Hindi text with Hindi translation. You have Hindi text with English translations also. And in this context, I must mention the greatest contributor is Gita Press, Gorakhpur, who have given us so many translations of almost every work. And there is the Murthy classic series, who have translated Sur Sagar. You have the Ramcharitmanas translations of the Gita Press again. Then you have the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Ujjwala Neelamani, some of the translations of the the Krishna Bhakti, the ISKCON Samsthans, the Vrindavan publication. So you do have a lot of material available in English with translations and original text accompanying the translations also. But we have to search for them. Anything else I can answer?
Madam, Subhash here, madam.
Yes. Yes, please go ahead.
So I'm very thankful and very grateful. I feel fortunate to attend your seminar. First of all, thanks a lot, madam, for giving the invitation.
Thank you,
I pray God that you will be continuing this sort of very good seminars and educating people. And as usual, we have seen that your seminar will be definitely totally a different one, loaded with lot of knowledge in very short amount of time. That is what we have been realizing.
Very short amount of time is the key word here. So basically exactly. Struggling through the whole thing. Okay.
After hearing 2 interpretations I got, madam, I want to sincerely share it actually.
Please go ahead.
So one is from sociological perspective, second is from literature perspective. First, sociological perspective, madam, that what we hear is there was lot of discrimination in our society. That's what we are reading from our history books and all, but it is not true based upon your entire narration, because if you see Bhakti cult entire thing as one entity, every gender, every part of the people from the society, irrespective of the caste, creed, they contributed immensely, and everyone's work is treated as a magnum opus. And it is not like that this particular group did not do. When it came to Adhyatmika Chintana, or when it came to Bhakti, India showed its unity, madam. First of all, there is nothing like this group of society was discriminated, that was intellectual, that was not there. And your seminar has totally proved it actually. This is very happy I felt from sociological perspective, madam. When it comes to literature perspective, this movement also gave birth to Ubhaya Kavis actually. Ubhaya Kavis are those people who had the capability to write in the Sanskritam as well as the vernacular languages. Yes. So here what has happened is there is also in our textbooks told that Sanskrit was given more importance by the people when compared to Dravid. Nothing like that. For example, if you take Vedanta Desika, His Holiness, he wrote in Tamil also, he wrote it in Sanskritam also. When you take Purandara Dasa, he wrote in Sanskritam also, he wrote in local language also. So from the literature perspective also, there was no discrimination at all. Every language was respected. Sanskrit was taken as a baseline, but at the same time, local languages were also given high amount of importance. So that is what I felt, madam, sincerely.
No, you're absolutely right, Subhash. In fact, it's a myth. There are many myths which circulate thanks to our textbooks of modern times. But it's a very good point actually, because when you look at any of the poets, they have multiple compositions in Sanskrit also. When you look at Vinay Patrika of Tulsidas, there are number of compositions in Sanskrit. In fact, there is one composition to every deity in Sanskrit with the Vinay Patrika. Surdas has Sanskrit compositions. Annamacharya has multiple Sanskrit compositions.
Yes, madam. Yes,
and
madam.
Also, it so happened that, at the time when a certain genre of literature was very predominant, like during the time of Annamacharya, nobody was writing in the song format. Everything was in Kavya, Nataka, Prabandha format. But Annamacharya chose to take Padakavita, or he chose to use the medium of song, because his purpose was to propagate Vishishtadvaita, to propagate the Sankirtana, idea. So he chose the song format for his, area of activity. So it is, and they were completely aware, because his own work, Sankirtana Lakshanam, says very clearly that his songs were inspired by the Prabandha sections of Sangita Ratnakara.
Undoubtedly, madam.
So they were all growing, all of them, the Sanskrits, the Prakrits, the Sanskrits and the Prakrits did give way a little bit to the dialects, and they wrote in every possible dialect. They wrote in Awadhi, they wrote in Brij Bhasha, they wrote in Maithili, they wrote in Marwadi, they wrote in, and prolifically they wrote in all of this. So as you said, I think they are very correct observations. The whole myth of discrimination, I think we should put that aside.
Yes, madam. Yes, madam. Sure. Thank you, madam. Thank you.
One question from Shri Ramchandra Rodam. So, Gorakhnath, Gorakhbani, can they be considered on the same lines of Bhakti poetry?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, Annamacharya himself refers to Gorakh, the Nath traditions, and he says, Gorakh Khure. He uses the word Gorakh Khure there. So he has definitely acknowledged these. In fact, Guru Nanak's verses also is part of Bhakti literature. I think the Nath traditions, the Nath Sampradaya, the Tamil Shaiva traditions, the Sharana Sharani traditions. But the reason I have not, used any of those in my presentation is because I was primarily talking only about those Sampradayas which evolved almost after the 5 major schools of Bhakti Vedanta. The popularly known Bhakti poets, which primarily came after the 13th century. But it was important for me to speak about Tirumular and some of the other Shaiva Siddhas. Now, the Siddha traditions vary a little bit, as you very well know, in the whole thing. And because even in Telugu land, after the period of Narayana Tirtha also, we have had Siddha traditions like Potuluri Veera Brahmam and others. So they were striding the path of the Siddha and the Siddha and the Bhakti traditions. But the context and the content of the songs is pretty much different from the context and the content of the Bhakti poetry. Like if you look at the verses of Potuluri Veera Brahmam, which is almost similar to the Nath compositions or the, the Shaiva Siddha compositions, he will say, he will talk about the internal aspects like Kashiki Povalena, Tirthamu Mosukuravalena, songs like that, where he says, Kashi Tirthamu Kannula Nunnadi, Basikannu Shivakashiga Nunnadi. So he is talking about highly philosophical, metaphysical concepts here. And the Bhakti poets, along with that, their whole concentration was on the love aspect. Continuous love in the form of the servant, in the form of the lover, in the form of the brother, in the form of the mother, in the form of... So this Bhakti element had to have more of the love element. along with the, the metaphysics of and the theology, they were balanced. So I particularly chose only those compositions, because the Siddha traditions, the metaphysical traditions, they are a completely different discussion, and probably they need another forum for that. So yes, but there is immense references to, as we discussed before also, to Vaishnava, to Sahajiya Vaishnavam also, and to the Nath traditions by the Bhakti poets. They have referred to them in several songs.
There is one question from Shri Narendra Kilada. This glossing over of discrimination is a privileged notion. Annamaya himself sang Brahman Okate, Brahmam Okate. Does not his song indicate discrimination?
We are not glossing over it. We are saying that it is highly exaggerated in its present context. Nobody is glossing over it. And we are also trying to say that it is not something which is a modern day concept. The poets have spoken about it. They've spoken about it in multiple ways. So yeah, he says, Pudami Sunakamupai, Polayu and Dokate, and all of this. So yes, they were very socially aware, but the movements were inclusive. Nobody says we are glossing over it. We are saying the poet movements were inclusive of every sect. When you look at the Jataras or the, the Pandharipur Jataras, the Jataras of Tirumala Tirupati Brahmotsavam, there, nobody is actually looking at the caste element. We are not glossing over the existence of caste. We are saying the movements were inclusive. That is, you have understood it wrongly.
There's one more question. Please tell us about the contribution of Tenali Ramakrishna.
Tenali Ramakrishna is a Prabandha poet. So he doesn't write the Bhakti wave. Tenali Ramakrishna was one of the 8 court poets of Krishnadevaraya, called the Ashtadiggajas. So Krishnadevaraya's time was the period of the very typical kind of composition in Telugu called the Prabandha. Now, this Prabandha is very different from the Prabandha that is mentioned in Sangita Ratnakara or the Prabandha Gitas, or even what Jayadeva calls his own Prabandha, the Gita Govindam. This is not the same Prabandha. This particular Telugu Prabandha had certain features. It had 18 specific features which had to be satisfied for it to be called a Prabandha. So Tenali Ramakrishna was one of those 8 court poets of Krishnadevaraya, very known for his, his being almost a vidushaka, like a court jester. And there are many stories of his wit, but more than that, he was a great poet. And his Panduranga Mahatyam is one of the most popular prabandhas of that era, other than Alasani Peddana's Manu Charitra and Krishnadevaraya's Amukta Malyada. These are all prabandha works of the Vijayanagara time. So yes, what else do you want to know about Tenali Ramakrishna? Because he's not under discussion right now. This is, but he was a prabandha poet of Krishnadevaraya's court. Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much. You've been patient with all of us and all our questions. So now we will close this.
No, I'd just like to say, I know the questions that, will be troubling people regarding all of this, but I just want to, on a final note, say that in this country, it is very difficult to demark philosophies. We cannot say that this is this sampradaya, this is this, and there has been no overlap, because if you look at Akka Mahadevi, she is considered to be a bhakti poet, but she's a Sharani also. So there are many points in history where they have overlapped. The philosophies have overlapped, the ideologies have overlapped. When you read Annamacharya, you sometimes don't know whether he's really a Vishishtadvaita poet, or is he an Advaita poet, or is he a Dvaita poet. Because if you see songs like Enta Matramuna Evvaru Talachina Anta Matrame Neevu, it's pure Advaita. He says, Taluturu Ninu Vaishnavulu, Kurimito Vishnu Ani, Palukuduru Ninu Vedantulu, Parabrahmam Manuchu. So he says, you are that what they think you are. You are only that much. He says, whatever, if they think you are this much, you're this much. If they think you are that much, you're that much. So there are strong songs where he appears to be an Advaitin. There are strong songs where he appears to be a Dvaitin. But actually the philosophy he follows is Vishishta Advaita. So there is a lot of, philosophical interaction. And it is very difficult for us to, kind of demark and say, okay, this is purely only this tradition and this is purely only that tradition. So there will always be ambiguities. There will always be questions. And that's nice because, who are we to know everything? So I think we can leave the questions and let them, keep ruminating. Why not?
Last question, what is the best way to teach all this to our children?
Read them the songs constantly from the time they are children. Because if you see, it is our, I think as parents, because I know I have a daughter now, of course, she's no longer a kid. She's 23 and she's here also. I think I've seen her somewhere. So it is, I think it's just how we interact with these songs in our own way. And yeah, definitely you can't make the child sit down and, say, okay, today I will teach you Surdas. Child will run away. But in the course of, our day-to-day life, I think if they keep seeing us, investing ourselves in understanding these ideas, from somewhere they will also, get this. And when, when they are children, that's the most impressionable age, when you're feeding them their Pappu Annam, that is a time to tell them, okay, there was a poet called Tulsidas and this is what he wrote. And, this was Surdas and this is what he did. And this is Annamacharya. I think that's the time to tell them. Just as our grandmothers told us, the stories of the Ramayana or the Mahabharata or anything, these little stories. And you can make them really interesting because, if you say, Maya Mori Main Nahi Makan Kayo, which child will not, love the idea?
So for common people like us, we are not as evolved as you. Could you make us a compilation of all these saints, the Bhakti poets, and at least give us the list so that we can get them and share it with our children? And
Absolutely. I'll be happy to. If you want, I can make different compilations for different age groups.
You should.
Also, because why not? I mean, if it's a small child, a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old child, there are kinds of songs which the child will enjoy. Right. Like Ramadas, if he has written Paluke Bangaramayana, he's also written Boochivani Piluvabona. So, he says, should I call the Boochivadu? Should I call him to take you away? So there are hundreds, thousands of compositions. I mean, what I tried to do today was like flow against the tide, because there are millions of compositions which I want to cite, millions of compositions which are equally enjoyable.
So please do it age-wise and also give a little write-up so that we can see, we may not have what you have, to explain to them the beauty of those poems, to explain. But if you can give us a write-up with those compilations, we can share that with these children. Who knows which child will bloom where?
Absolutely. In fact, I had suggested this when I was part of the SPICMECE, when I was one of the volunteers for SPICMECE at a certain time. You taking Indian art, music and dance to schools and colleges is a fantastic idea. I always agreed with that. But it is not enough. It is not enough because we have to have regular, events in schools, regular things where they are constantly exposed to, language, to understand, including my daughter. No, they cannot speak right in languages other than English.
I'm sorry.
And we have already created a problem by relegating Hindi or Telugu as second language. It is not the first, it's not the main language. So there itself, we have created a problem for ourselves. And after 5th or 7th class, when they have to start preparing for their NEET, MEET, whatever, you know, all those IIT, IG, this, that, and all sundry, that's when they completely forget all the languages except English.
Yeah, yeah.
So this is a, you know, this is something, this urban world is of our own making. Now we have to unmake it.
I'm sorry to say that I remember I was speaking to one of the schools. I said, why don't you introduce yoga? And they said, no, we will be labeled as a Hindu school. So where will our schools be able to put about our poets and their poems? I doubt that will happen, but at least as mothers, as in the Bhakti era, when there were invasions, all this has still, we kept our culture together. It will be good if people like you can at least make, like now, Pedabal Siksha Manam, everybody has in their house. If you can make a compilation like this, we would really love to help.
I love to do that. I'd love to do that. And yeah, I think there are, but you know, even in the US, I've been seeing with organizations, you know, like Manabadi, and there are some which are really striving to keep the Telugu language alive. You know, and in fact, I was very taken aback at one of my visits to the university, you know, where I teach, that the children are, you know, they're reciting Padya Natakams, and they are singing Padyams, and they are doing Padya Natakams in Telugu. So it is not a task that is undoable, but it's just something that, you know, we have to put our mind to. I think that is most important.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And yeah, I think there are some more questions.
Oh, there are?
Looks like there is. I had one question. Can it be put forward? Devjani Chatterjee.
Yes, please. Devjani, please go ahead.
So I just had one trouble or confusion in my mind when I deal with children these days. Taking forward the discussion that was going on just now. Like when we were young, Akka, whatever our parents taught us or our grandparents taught us about bhakti and connection to divinity, that was the most important thing. We took it as they told us. We never questioned it. But these days, like kids, as for example, my own daughter, she calls herself an agnostic. So it's like I find it very difficult to make her believe or have faith in this beautiful this bhakti philosophy, or just letting go for me to make them do any abhinaya or emoting that bhakti when they are dancing. So how to handle that, Akka?
See, this is an existential question you're asking me, Devjani. I don't have answers to everything. See, the thing is, I think we had our own share of people who didn't believe at every stage, because and some things we had accepted when we were very young, because I remember my father also had no understanding of anything, connected to God or spirituality, or he also knew no other language other than English. So, even I come from a family where hardly they knew anything, and my mother my father never told me any stories of any gods or anything, but I think this is highly individual. Some people have it, some people don't have it, but one thing is absolutely certain: you can't push anything down anyone's throats, but you just have to kind of raise the question in their mind constantly in a very subtle manner as to do they really believe in what they believe in, or is it just something they believe in because it is popularly believed by many people of their times or their peers or their friends or social media or something. Do they just believe in it because they believe in it? So these are things I think we just have to kind of, even then we may be unsuccessful. There is no one blanket formula for this. But the only thing we can say is, we just have to kind of encourage them to question and think whether, what they are saying really comes from a space of understanding what they're saying, Or are they just mouthing and repeating what they are hearing popularly, in the times, in the prevalent times? So I think this questioning, if we have within ourselves, then maybe slowly, we can start encouraging them to question. Because there has been a lot of change. I also remember the time when I was very young, my 15, 16 years, when I was that age, there were a lot more people who didn't believe actually, because of the whole, the times were like that, the socialism and communism and all of that. So the times were like that. There were a lot of people, even in my own families, who didn't read our epics, who didn't know any other language other than English. But today I see that a lot of things are changing also. So I think it's a fine balance. I think it's a fine balance, something that we have to resolve to do and say, okay, I think I believe in this. I want to do this. And let me see how many people I can convince to do this. It is impossible to convince those who don't believe. It is much better to convince those who are on the verge of belief, but don't know what to believe. So I think it's much better to convince them and to, bring them into your thing. But I think you can just keep working on your children. That's all we can do. Ultimately, we don't know. I mean, there's no sure shot formula, of course, but we can only try. We can only try.
Yes, true, Akka, absolutely true, Akka. I just keep telling them, like she says, there is cosmic energies, there's some energy, and I say, you call it cosmic energy, I call it my Krishna. That is the difference. That is how I try to handle it.
That's all. See, ultimately, these are all, I am spiritual, I'm not religious. These are all concepts we have fed the children because there have been associations of a, kind with certain words. And as these myths keep busting, then I think slowly we can orient them towards understanding, concepts as they were originally meant to be understood. So it's a continuous effort. I'm totally helpless to say that, okay, this is the solution, Devjani. I can't say that, there is nothing like that. So yeah, we just keep trying, doing a bit. That's about it, I guess. That's
One
it.
question from Mr. Narendra Kilada. Would you like to ask it yourself if we unmute you?
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you, ma'am, for answering my previous question. I also wanted to ask you about Kshetriya can we consider Kshetriya as a Bhakti poet? And
I don't consider Kshetriya as a Bhakti poet. Number one, bottom line, I don't consider Kshetriya as a Bhakti poet. Okay. Should I tell you the reason for that?
Yes.
Yeah, the reason for it is like, you see, just yesterday I gave a talk on Kshetriya and Annamacharya and the milieus, the socio-politico, religious, cultural milieus from which Kshetriya and Annamacharya have come. Now, while it is unwise for us to ignore obvious philosophical connotations in certain songs, at the same time, it is also unwise for us to attribute philosophical connotations where they don't exist. Now, if you look at Kshetriya, there are some devotional songs of his. Maguvatana Kelika Mandiramu Vedale, when he saw the goddess Perundevi come out of the Kanchi Varada temple, there he sang spontaneously for her. Sripati Suttu Bariki Nenopaleka Ninnu Vedite Kopala Muba Gopala. This song is again devotional in nature. But Chudare Adinadache Hoyalu is not a devotional song. It is a statement on the social structure of that period. It talks about, the rules and the regulations that, were set for the women of high society, the clandestine meetings and all these things. So Kshetriya handled a wide range of human emotions. And putting everything into the divinity bracket will be completely, incorrect. Kshetriya, Sarangapani, the later Javali writers, Dasu Sriramulu and others, they wrote very human songs for performance. They wrote for the Devadasis also. They wrote for the courtesans. They gave them material to dance. All of it is definitely not bhakti literature. It is not bhakti literature. Some of them were, please don't misunderstand me. This is not a judgmental statement. It's just a matter of fact that lot of these poetries or verses were purely for, performance. They were performance to be danced. If he made a padam in which the Devadasi praises Vijayaraghava Nayaka, he wrote it at a time when he was being patronized by the king Vijayaraghava Nayaka. There are umpteen songs of Sarangapani in which Sarangapani himself says that he wrote those songs because he was under the patronage of the Damerla, landlords of Kalahasti. So he wrote number of songs purely because of patronage, some for the Devadasis, and many compositions which spoke about human interactions. All of these cannot be lumped and put into Bhakti literature category. There are specific compositions which are highly Bhakti oriented, and that is a different set of compositions. So that is my opinion of the whole thing. I hope it answers your question.
Yes, thank you, ma'am.
There's one question from Vaishnavi P. We have Adhyatma Ramayana Kirtanas, Kamba Ramayanam, Ranganatha Ramayanam, and such works for Ramayana. Do we have any such works for Mahabharata?
There are very few recensions of the Mahabharata, Vaishnavi. There are sections which have been culled from the Mahabharata and rewritten as independent works. But the complete Mahabharata translations, we have the Andhra Mahabharatam, which is written in Telugu. And as much as the Ramayana has been reproduced, the Mahabharata has not been reproduced that many, but specific incidents and episodes from the Ramayana have been, taken out and reproduced by several writers and poets, but not many versions of the Ramayana. But it is very interesting also that in modern times, you have many, young people who are writing their own versions about Ramayana, about Mahabharata. Recently I came across something called Mahabharata Unraveled by a very young, writer called Ami Ganatra. So many versions are coming now. People are thinking about these things, about characters from the Mahabharata, the Panchakanyas. There have been works written about Draupadi and, different characters. But the entire Mahabharata being reproduced is a very rare. We have it, of course, in Andhra, in Telugu. We definitely have. Ramayana has been written in every possible language, right from Assamese to, you have Kritivasa's Ramayana and so many.
I think we're done for the day. Thank you so much, and thank you.